The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government. A podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-off or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is the Spin-off Podcast Network with an emergency podcast. Jacinda Ardern has resigned. I repeat, Jacinda Ardern has resigned. Tēnā koutou katoa, I'm Toby Manhire. This has Gone by Lunchtime with me, Ben Thomas, Annabelle Mather. When the news landed this afternoon, we were all preparing our pieces on the interesting details in the National Party caucus reshuffle. And then Jacinda Ardern stood up and announced the election date, which I had wrongly predicted would be in November. It was October. It's going to be October the 14th.
Oh, was that announced as well?
That was announced first. And
following in the footsteps of the precedents set by John Key, she announced an early election date.
Yeah, well, except he didn't, and he didn't within seconds announce his resignation. And look, there had been rumours circulating. I think a lot of that was based on vibes rather than actual information or intel. But it came as a hell of a shock. I think you put it quite well, Annabelle, in the group chat. Your immediate response was, and I quote, "Holy fuck sticks."
Yeah. That's always my go-to reaction for moments like these.
We were in our caucus retreat, of course, the Gone by Lunchtime caucus retreat in Twizel, but have jetted back to the studio to cover this.
The Gone by Lunchtime boot camp.
Who would have... You didn't see this coming, did you, Ben?
No, in fact, I told people who said that Jacinda Ardern might step down before the election, I told them they were fantasists. I said, don't be crazy. She is the party's most valuable political asset, despite whatever the turmoil of the last few years, despite the hit in pollings. She's still, by almost every measure, the preferred Prime Minister. She's never been topped in a poll. And now she's gone.
That's a funny thing, like how much we dissed people who were writing columns about how she was going to resign.
I mean, there was a sense that she was clearly tired. She looked kind of rinsed. I mean, the way she put it, the metaphor she used repeatedly this afternoon in Napier at the Labour Party caucus retreat on Marine Parade, the way she put it was that she'd run out of gas. The tank is empty.
And how's she going to fill it up at $2.80 a litre?
That's right, and they couldn't. The state of inflation meant
the cost of living crisis means no more gas.
It's the cost of Prime Minister in crisis, isn't it? We've talked, I think, at various times about how the last 6 years has been kind of, in some sense, 9 years compressed. In some ways, it's felt like 3 years. In some ways, it's felt like 9. And in terms of where Jacinda Ardern is, she said, "Look, I'm exhausted." Basically, is what she was saying. She said that she departed at the end of last year to go for summer break, and I have no reason to believe that this is anything but the truth. Hoping that she could summon up the energy. You know, she said, "I can't." Having reflected over summer, she said, "I know I no longer have that extra bit in the tank to do the job's justice. It's that simple," and it does seem kind of that simple, doesn't it? I mean, she moved to kind of disabuse any efforts, and we saw that with Key's resignation as well, of people looking for some sinister plot that underlined all of it. But
no, I mean, this is
and I think your child turning 5 and starting school is a really important milestone for mums. And I think what people forget is, you know, when you're a working mum, you're constantly battling feelings of guilt about how much you're able to be there for your child. And, you know, she has the most stressful, demanding job in the country. So I believe her when she says that, you know, prioritising her family is a key driver for her decision.
She was asked, Ben...
As someone who also spent his 3-week summer holiday trying to summon up the energy to face a year of work in 2023, I can totally understand her decision. And I think it is important actually to circle back. You know, we did say that the people who were, you know, some of the people who were suggesting Ardern would resign before the election, you know, we said they're crazy. And part of the reason for that is they were crazy, right? Because it was associated with all of these sort of swirling conspiracies. And I think it is important to note that just the same as John Key, whose departure was also accompanied by sort of rampant speculation from some of the sort of nuttier corners of the internet.
Some horrible libelous nonsense.
Yeah, and I'm sure the same will come in terms of the Prime Minister's resignation, but... You know, there's no basis for it. Right?
It's funny because last night I was reading some stuff on, you know, what the pundits were expecting from today's announcement. It's like maybe an election date, maybe a little bit of policy stuff, maybe this, maybe it'll be a day or 2 days or a month after. It's like, no, she went and like totally blew all of those whakaaro right out of the water.
A lot of us writing the 3 big announcements that will come at the start of the year and what they will. Here's a slightly bigger one.
Well, I mean, there's a couple, you know, well, in terms of the 3 big announcements, they were meant to be the announcement of the election date, check. A cabinet reshuffle, check. Pretty significant one.
I guess so.
And number 3, jettisoning unpopular policies and paring down the work stream. I mean, she pared her work stream right down.
That's true. That's true.
I mean, look, and more delivery.
Blissful to-do list awaits. Jacinda Ardern. She was asked in the stand-up, at the press conference, she was asked whether or not some of the more poisonous, vitriolic, horrible abuse that has been thrown at her during, to some extent before, and certainly subsequent to the parliamentary occupation, laced with conspiracy, disinformation, and just including people targeting her when she visits primary schools. I mean, countless untrue rumours. She was asked if that played a part, although not in such a long-winded way. And she said that was, I think she said that took its toll, but that wasn't the reason. I mean, it must have figured into it, mustn't it?
It's a tough one because it probably would, right? I mean, the change in atmosphere from going from being, you know, extraordinarily loved public figure, you know, those sort of classic Jacinda mania shots from not just early on in the campaign, but, you know, the over and over again of, you know, these public walkabouts where she'd be literally mobbed, you know, and it was sort of like, you know, Hard Day's Night sort of footage, just kind of fans streaming behind her. 2, these sort of very rancorous receptions, you know, by sort of roving bands of, you know, anti-vaxxers, which is, you know, that is the main
people
group.
Shouting, I am a living man. And, you know, I mean, that kind of level of people who are very deep down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, that's right. You would certainly hope that wasn't decisive. You wouldn't want those sort of people in that kind of discourse to kind of be incentivized.
Right, exactly. Exactly. But it does probably have some impact on the kind of picture you see in your mind when you imagine the campaign that awaits.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, and not in any way to kind of downplay it, but other, you know, we've had other prime ministers and other politicians who've, you know, Jim Bolger was sort of, you know, met with this same sort of reception everywhere he went. Don Brash got dirt thrown at him at Waitangi. John Key got jostled all the time. You know, I think this is a new level of vitriol, and I think that the drivers of it are particularly kind of crazy. But, you know, it's not the first time politicians have faced abuse.
I think too, like when you're a mum and you have a child who loves you and needs you and wants to spend time with you, and you're having to sacrifice what's in their best interest to do the job that you need to do, and your work and your commitment is met with this type of vitriol and misogyny and all of that stuff, it would lead you to question why on earth you're doing it, if you're investing into the right thing. And yeah, like Ben says, it's just an unprecedented level of vitriol because there's, so much of it is so completely irrational. It's not like debating issues. It's awful. And when you think about, the death threats and all of that being rained down on her and her family, I understand why you'd reach a point where you literally felt like you just didn't have the gas left in the tank for it.
It, of course, triggers a vacancy, creates a vacancy, triggers a contest, the form of which is to be decided. We'll come to that in a moment. Let's talk first, though, about, even at this very early point, about what the legacy of Jacinda Ardern Prime Minister might be. She touched on a range of things, which is her right to do. She talked about addressing housing crisis, child poverty, climate change. But the big thing that is kind of, I think, beyond doubt, Annabelle, is the response to crises, isn't it? I mean, in the form of March 15, 2019, and then certainly in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic in terms of bringing people together. But on both those cases, bringing together in a sense of rallying the country to a cause. First, in terms of trying to avoid, retribution or ugliness stemming out of that attack, and then more recently in COVID-19, kind of getting people together in terms of what was required for a lockdown. Is that how you see it? What else?
Well, I think, tens of thousands of vulnerable lives were saved as a result of her leadership during the COVID pandemic. I think, I remember when Winston Peters held his press conference and announced that Ardern would be Prime Minister. I just had my fourth daughter. Waimahia was only a few days old. And I feel, that for my girls to grow up at a time when there was not just a woman but a young woman who was leading the country has been a really powerful thing for all girls who statistically actually make up half the population, women, just sort of
slightly more, I think, in fact.
Some stats to the game this year.
These are incredible numbers being wrapped up by the Labour government.
And then, but more than that, she then had a baby in Parliament, which I think is another powerful message to send to our girls, that you don't have to sacrifice motherhood in order to be a great leader. And I think that, Jenny Shipley had already had her kids when she got to Parliament, so I think that was another really powerful message.
Yeah, if you wanted to be very caricaturish about it, you'd say that her legacy was that she achieved almost nothing of what she promised, and lots of things that no one anticipated. That is, of course, that's a kind of throwaway line, because they did accomplish, the Labour government under Ardern did accomplish a number of things that they set out to do, probably most particularly industrial relations, you'd say, or employment law, where they raised the minimum wage, really cranked that up. I think a lot of people thought that $20 an hour was probably a very aspirational kind of goal, but they did it in pretty short order. The fair pay agreements legislation finally through, that delivered to their sort of union base. Matariki, another public holiday. So in that sort of area, I think they actually really kind of did what they said they were going to do.
It did increase benefit levels.
They increased benefit levels. I think they get more criticism than is probably warranted in terms of welfare, because I was having a look at benefit levels. It's very hard to do these days. They don't sort of tabulate everything. Yeah. For a single person aged 25 on the job seeker allowance, right now it's $315 a week. It was $211 a week when Ardern came into power. Now, there's all sorts of other issues about, abatement rates when you're in part-time work and things like that. These are real increases.
I think the free tertiary was an important one as well.
Probably a misfire, but and of course there was the very, very notable, often talked about by people like me, failures of delivery on those really big ticket items that they came to power on, the sort of transformational stuff.
Kiwi Build is the one that sticks out, I think,
Kiwi
because
Build.
that was so central to the original pitch. I mean, that transformational word, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in pods to come, is. I mean, I was hoping to interview Jacinda Ardern shortly. I don't know whether that will happen still, but to look back at some of
she's probably got time.
The earlier remarks about transformation, down at Crave. But I guess the point you made, which you acknowledged was a caricature just then, Ben, is that they're not necessarily unrelated. The disruptions. Yeah. Especially in the second part of COVID, there were a lot of working groups going on in the first term, but that did shift the focus dramatically. That wasn't simply a kind of question of applying mana and leadership. It was just changed, moved everything out of the way.
Yeah, and I don't think it's an exaggeration to say we could not have had a better leader during the Christchurch attack. I don't think that there would have been as much daylight between the ways that a national government or a Labour government would have approached the pandemic, but I think that Ardern was excellent, and I don't know if a lot of people appreciate it. My understanding is that a lot of these early calls, closing the border and things, people say, the magic was that she followed officials' advice, but not really. Actually, the Ministry of Health was a unit that was not really set up for this kind of thing, or it was certainly not ready for it. And a lot of those early calls were actually made by Cabinet, and that basically means by Ardern, and she made the right calls. She exercised personal judgment, which was, led to a better result than almost anywhere else in the world in 2020. So, she has her critics, obviously, but there's no way that you can look at her total time in power and say that she wasn't a good Prime Minister.
I think there's also some, symbolic gestures that were meaningful to people, like apologising over Erebus.
Dawn raids.
That was inquiry into historical abuse of, wards of the state. Those things were important too.
What about more generally in terms of Te Ao Māori, Annabelle? Jacinda Ardern went to Waitangi in 2018, went up to the marae and said, I urge you to judge me on my record of what I've achieved for Māori. I don't know if presumably she won't be there this year after all, because she won't want to.
Well, they said there'll be a new Prime Minister by February the 7th.
They said, yeah.
So maybe she'll turn up to Waitangi for her exit interview.
Well, I think she did a really great job of resetting the tone at Waitangi and the morning barbecue or whatever it was, and making it feel a lot more toe and warm, and as a politician not coming in with an adversarial approach and being there to listen rather than to just deliver a speech and boot it out of there as quickly as possible. I mean, obviously she's shepherded in the biggest group of Māori MPs, Matariki, all of those sorts of things. There's been a huge shift, not just in terms of like the Wellington bureaucracy, but across corporate New Zealand in terms of wanting to be more treaty aligned and diversity and all of those things. And I think a lot of that's in no small part due to her leadership on Māori issues. I thought it was interesting that John Tamihere, as the president of the Māori Party, came out and talked about what an incredible loss she is to New Zealand as a leader, and how much she's done for Te Ao Māori and all of that, because, he's not a guy that gives away compliments very generously, and particularly not to the Labour Party. So
particularly not to women Labour Party Prime Ministers.
Talofa lava. I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spinoff. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spinoff member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Let's turn to what's next for the leadership, which of course we're talking about two jobs at the same time, which have become customary and certainly in British politics recently, but not so much here since Bill English took over from John Key, which is we're talking about the Labour Party leadership and the Prime Ministership at the same time. Jacinda Ardern made it really clear in her speech. The implication was very clear, I think, to her caucus. Don't piss around. Do what you need to do on Sunday. There is a caucus meeting on Sunday, and what needs to be done as far as she's concerned, and I imagine some involved, is a 2/3 majority for one candidate. So that doesn't mean it's a walkover that there's just one candidate. Well, that's always possible, but it means that a 2/3 majority would avoid the need to go to I think it's a tripartite system where the voting is divvied up between MPs. On one, I don't know, it's still 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, I forget, between MPs, union affiliates, and the membership as a whole. Even if it does go to that, she has indicated that contest should be...
That has to be done in a week.
Truncated compared to what... Does it have to... Those were the rules.
In an election year, I think they changed it to make
there were
it
some
easier,
changes to the rules that make those things that makes it less risky that we'll see what we have in the past, which is very long road shows and your countless debates. Who's in, who's out? Most notably, Grant Robertson is out. Jacinda Ardern was expecting the question. She said that Grant Robertson had given her his blessing to say, following her announcement, that he wasn't seeking the leadership. He then put a statement out 5 or 10 minutes ago, so that was all prepared, saying that he had said after his run for the leadership in 2014, I think, that he wouldn't go again, and that he was sticking with that. He wasn't going to go for it again.
Yeah, the bad news is that Robertson has ruled himself out, but the good news is that, Mark Mitchell hasn't.
Mark Mitchell will...
I'm hearing from sources that after consulting closely with the Prime Minister about her resignation, a key role was played by National MP Mark Mitchell.
Or Andrew Little, as we were discussing before, could come in, become Prime Minister until 7 weeks before the election, at which point someone sweeps in and there's a... name goes here mania, and then that person wins.
Well, maybe this is Little's opportunity to finally lead the Labour Party into an election and get 22% of the vote, as he was denied in 2017.
Do you think Robertson could be swayed?
Well,
because he seems obviously the natural successor.
So this is the psyop theory, right?
I'd always assumed that was a high likelihood of happening at whatever point that Jacinda Ardern did resign, whether it was after an election defeat or after a victory after a year. What was my guess of the two possibilities for that, rather than today? And then you would think that Grant Robertson, yes, could say, I had ruled myself out, but I've received a deputation from everyone wants me to do it. I'm being dragged against my will, which is much what Jacinda Ardern was able to do. And it's quite a compelling picture, and not necessarily disingenuous to be... Could that happen now? I think the fact that he's gone right out there and it was there and issued a statement saying it ain't me would be a hell of a turn.
I think that if it were to be him, that Labour could conceivably have a shot at winning the election. I think without him, it's going to be incredibly difficult.
Yeah, so this is the thing, right, is that when Key handed over to English, and it wasn't a straight handover, Key technically said,
There was a
I don't
contest.
have a preference. There's a contest.
I don't have a preference, but I really, really, really
I've always found working with Bill very good.
Check out this guy.
And that made sense because Bill and John Key had been a team for 8 years. Everybody thought of them as a pair. They were both well known. Bill had been the finance minister and the deputy prime minister. Robertson equally, and Robertson's really come into his own in the last few years. He's become much more comfortable with the business community, much more respected in terms of his work in the finance, with the finance and the economic stuff. And very shrewd political operator, good with media, very quick on his feet, knows all the policies, and has that public profile. So the thinking that Key had, which he sort of explained more in interviews kind of after, sort of a year or two later, was that he felt Bill had a better chance in the election than he did because Bill had all the positives of what the government had achieved without any of the personal baggage that you just accrete over time as a prime minister. And that would be the same sort of thinking that would make you think, okay, if Ardern, definitely the best politician in Labour, definitely its best asset. But if she hands over to Robertson, maybe you get the same result where the polling still has some potential upside and you don't, there's no massive discontinuity. Now we've got a situation where you could very well be introducing a prime minister that the majority of the country has never heard of. Some of the names that have been floated, Michael Wood, Kerry Allen, very good politicians, whether they're ready to be prime minister, different, not necessarily the same question, very good politicians, but not known quantities. Which really kind of springing a surprise. If you're in a situation where suddenly the leader of the opposition, who's only been in the job for a year in the Parliament for 3, is better known than whoever is currently the prime minister of the country, that's quite a leap to take.
So looked at through that lens, then the favourite is Chris Hipkins.
Chris Hipkins, absolutely,
because he has been around for a while. He's Mr. Fix-It in lots of ways.
It's the natural progression of giving him every policy.
After Ashley Bloomfield and Jacinda Ardern, he's probably the third most recognisable COVID face when everyone was watching. Michael Wood is the other one. Audrey Young wrote about this, who were the contenders, and she's as well informed as anybody in that bubble, and she said Michael Wood. Kerry Allen, I heard on the radio on the way in, hasn't ruled herself out, and she's been picked by a lot of people as a future prime minister. The question for her will be: Is this the right time?
Charisma in sackfuls, and something to think about. Earlier I was saying Labour does. The risk for Labour is that there is a collapse at this point because. Just like, the fall of Yugoslavia, in post-Soviet times, there was you have a strong man sort of in charge, which in this case is Jacinda Ardern. Every one of that huge caucus, over 60 MPs, all knew that they were there in their positions and in their seats because of Ardern's personal popularity. There was no arguing with Ardern. There's no, suddenly you put in, somebody else from the front bench. You don't have the same sort of attachment or loyalty. You don't owe them that. They didn't put you in that position. And that's a big issue when you've got a caucus that big. People already know they're going to be losing their seats or that they're going to be on the borderline in this campaign. There's only 3 days or 3 or 4 days until they take that vote.
Yeah.
But, in terms of the sort of running around and thinking, who am I better off with, there are real risks. Now, one thing that happens if it does start factionalising, then you start looking at huge Māori caucus who might think, is it time for a Māori Prime Minister?
I wouldn't be surprised if Penny Henare had a crack at it.
Who's been being talked about as someone who might be standing down, but then he's an experienced, not as experienced as Nanaia Mahuta, who's got even, a longer parliamentary record.
Three Waters probably.
I doubt she'd even try
But
now.
then, that would be history making. Kerry Allen would be history making to an even greater extent because you'd have a gay Māori Prime Minister, which would be extraordinary. The point you make is a great one, though, Ben, because up to now, all the people who are in seats that they're probably going to lose, because even a victory would mean for a lot of the people that are in there now not making it back because it's a current majority of the House. They knew not just all the things you said, but also that Jacinda Ardern is a stunning campaigner. She's a formidable
She's
debater.
A phenom, yeah.
She would, whether or not it would be winning or losing, you couldn't say there would be anyone better, notwithstanding the things that she's provided in the past, to potentially eviscerate a relative novice in a series of debates. And now, I mean, again, to make the point, what happened after John Key left the National Party? You just need to read Andrea Vance's book, Blue Blood. That's the first chapter. That's what that unleashed. The period of Bill English, the election defeat, that was all material. But that was, it's sometimes a power vacuum at some point is terrible. There's no law that says that what changed in 7 weeks before the election in 2017, when Jacinda Ardern took over from Andrew Little, that change can't be undone.
Oh, of course. And many of the Labour caucus have never been in, weren't around then. Things can change overnight. They can change very quickly. This is the real risk. I mean, I think Ardern's resignation should be the headline because, first of all, it is a surprise, it is a shock, and, she deserves to have her legacy, I actually think celebrated, but certainly, analysed and gone over. But actually, I think the real catastrophe for Labour here is there isn't Robertson to step into the breach. I think the combination of those two decisions just sets them on a disastrous path to the election. Look, can always be proved wrong, but I think that, I just sort of, it seems like self-immolation.
Yeah, I agree. I think, can I just say about Kiri Tapu, she has an easiness and an affability about her that reminds me of John Key. And, she's a great talker. She's, credible in a crisis, all of those things. But I think three little challenges that she has that she would face is misogyny, racism and homophobia, which could make it quite difficult for her in the election.
I think on the other hand, she'd get the rugger bloke vote, the military vote if she could gets on the jumpsuit again, and does a few.
I actually think that if Robertson had been willing to stand, it could have been a really positive thing for Labour. Ardern going, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way to Ardern because she is incredibly, an incredibly talented politician and debater and communicator and all of those things. But I think people are just jaded by her. And, a lot of that is to do with COVID and the 1 o'clocks and, National, who used to complain about her getting to, hold court every day. I think actually it didn't have a positive effect with voters. I think that whether or not people realise that at the time they started to grow tired of her.
I think he would.
And so a fresh someone like Robertson, who, is a great debater, humorist, can talk about footy, all of those things. And
has been joined at the hip with Grant Robertson. I mean, it was one of the many half-written pieces that I will discard now is the one about how the election is going to be about the two combos, the would-be Prime Minister and the would-be finance. It was, it was very much Willis and Luxon versus Ardern and Robertson. And remember all the way back to 2014 when it was Jacinda, that was the portmanteau that was Jacinda and Grant, and they've been together. He's been almost a mentor to her. Anyway, I mean, I'd be fascinated to know how hard he thought about it and whether or not it was because, he has. But I guess the other factor is that you look in the way that Bill English was characterised as a caretaker. You look like the interim Prime Minister, and I think there must be some part of him that thought, actually, probably we're not going to win this one. The best way to rebuild is to, skip that bit.
Hey, just throwing another name out there, because now that he's not busy having to bully Sharma, like, what about Kieran McNulty?
Kieran McNulty.
Yeah,
his schedule's a lot freer now.
That's another one. People would.
He sold his ute. He got rid of his ute. I think that was probably a mistake. Megan Woods.
Yeah, I mean, this is very capable, extremely capable, but in terms of public persona, that kind of, you don't need astounding charisma. Luxon isn't charismatic, but the other thing is that as Prime Minister, you got to be across everything. Right, and you got to do the weeklies. You have to do so many stand-ups, and you've got to have answers. The leader of the opposition, to a certain extent, can throw stones, but the Prime Minister actually has to know what all of her ministers are doing, and be prepped. And there's a very good, the Prime Minister's office is very capable. I'm sure that they'll all stay on. But
will they?
These
they'd be pretty simple. I mean, the same exhaustion that Jacinda Ardern has basically described. I mean, she basically described herself as burnt out. She didn't use those words, but that's what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, of course, that's going to apply to many of her staff too.
Well, yeah, but I mean, look, I think if you had the senior staff sort of decamp, it would basically be putting up the white flag.
But look, history making, this some combination as leader and deputy leader of Wood and Woods.
I love it.
Woodmania.
Yeah.
That would make international headlines. Never before, anywhere.
Yeah.
Have we had to?
It's a great idea.
Michael Woodhouse.
I mean, look. The thing is, this is all actually just
leader.
All of this is just sort of fluff talk because actually,
what?
Actually,
how very dare you?
Well, the thing is, the question's already been decided because actually, if as per the House of Windsor, if you look at the direct line of succession, Ardern's gone, Robertson's gone, it's Kelvin.
It is pretty amazing that we haven't mentioned Kelvin, who is literally
the
deputy leader of the Labour Party. But I think
imagine if someone nominated him, he'd probably have a heart attack.
I mean, he's made clear that he doesn't want to be deputy prime minister, so I don't think prime minister is the job for him.
He doesn't really pedangy it.
What does it mean for the election? We've covered that really. I mean, for the National Party, they had a pretty good morning. I wrote a piece about watching on the live stream Luxon's speech and the stand-up that followed, and he was pretty good. And I thought, I'll just publish this ahead of the Ardern stand-up, and I was umming and ahhing whether to put it into one tedious long piece about the caucus. I'll just publish it, which is just as well because it's useless. I mean, it only got read by 3 people probably, but like all that stuff that happened in the morning. I had some notes on for our next pod that we're going to do. I would talk about. I thought it was quite interesting that Simeon Brown got the Auckland portfolio.
Oh yeah, big news.
But maybe not today. Maybe that's not a discussion for today.
Can I say I thought Luxon's response was gracious. Unlike Seymour's. Did you read Seymour's?
I haven't seen that.
It's not very nice.
And in fact, Christopher Luxon is giving a media conference as we speak.
I mean, this is the and the playbook for this. Labor have already shown us, throughout from 2017 onwards. What did National get peppered with by Ardern and Robertson? It was like, this is not the Labour Party of Bill English and John Key.
Yeah.
So we might be hearing this is not the Labour Party of Jacinda Ardern.
Well, weirdly,
within weeks.
Funnily enough, I thought of that line when I was watching Luxon, who came out pretty confidently for his speech, looked genuinely in pretty good spirits.
You
and there was an
old guy.
air of condescension. And there was an air of, who can blame these people? They tried their hardest, but it's just not working out for them. And it's quite a powerful.
It's a flex.
It's quite a powerful flex. Anyway, I mean, what I think no one is going to argue with is that this was going to be a very hard election for Labour to win, and now it's immeasurably hard almost. Things happen, but who knows? So thank you for joining us for this emergency podcast. Before we go, a word about the Morningside Live block party, which is coming up on Sunday, February 5. Taking over at McDonald Street for an extravaganza of local food, local brews and entertainment. Fat Freddy's Drop, headlining, with a supporting lineup curated by the band, maybe even Ben Thomas joining the brass section. Who knows? There'll be a party space with DJs Benny Salvador, Andy Heartthrob and others. Lots of nooks and crannies, things happening. Most importantly, the Spin-Off Carpet Club, featuring snappy guest star sprinkled live versions of the Spin-Off podcast Gone by Lunchtime.
What?
And the Real Pod.
I didn't know that.
I told you about it.
Oh, you did.
It's going to be great.
But what was this nooks and crannies thing?
I don't know. It's in a basement in a carpet factory.
Yeah.
Wow, the first big political event of the year.
Yes.
Live Gone by Lunchtime.
And live comedy from Chris Parker, Janae Henry, Guy Montgomery, Courtney Dawson, plus Toby and Toby.
Oh, I love Courtney Dawson.
I thought you were saying you love
She's
Toby.
a brilliant young stand-up comedian. She does comedy with her
she
dad
is really
too.
good.
She's so funny.
Very funny.
Yeah.
Toby Manhire and Toby Morris, live drawings of very special guests, some good guests. We might invite Jacinda Ardern because if it's all done by then, it's in her electorate.
Yeah.
She might wander down. You never know. This is a formal invitation.
She might want a DJ.
So it's down in the bowels of the earth in the underground car park of the Carpet Court. Lots else going on. Full details on Moshtix, where you can get your tickets, and you can find a link to the tickets in the show notes. It's going to be fun. We might even talk before then. Who knows? There's a lot going on. The year has begun with a real whiz and a bang. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Annabelle. Thanks, Sam, for producing.
Hey, let's just toast our outgoing Prime Minister.
Oh, yeah.
She deserves it.
Okay.
Cheers, Auntie.
Cheers, Jacinda.
Kia ora, I'm Duncan Grieve, founder of The Spin-Off. You can help us keep all of The Spin-Off's award-winning journalism free for everybody by becoming a member today at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
Kia ora e te iwi, Te Aihe Butler here, podcast manager at The Spin-Off. If you enjoy listening to our podcasts, consider supporting our mahi by signing up to become a Spin-Off member at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.